Hi everyone, welcome to another of the interviews in the series speaking to epilepsy clinical researchers, trying to give some insight into what's behind the scenes of the people that you see talking in podia and making waves in the world of epilepsy. It's an absolute pleasure this morning to welcome Dr. Rebecca Bromley here with us. She's a senior lecturer in Manchester. She's done some groundbreaking work and really making important contributions into the world of epilepsy, looking particularly at the effects of anti-seizure medicines in developing brains. And I'm going to touch on that, but as I say, the most important thing will be to look behind the scenes. Welcome, Rebecca. Thank you so much for giving up your time for this today. I can see how enthralled you are to be here. I'm slightly nervous.
Well, you said you wanted a favour. This is the favour.
The question I've been asking everyone in the first opening question, which always interests me when I speak to people in the world of epilepsy, why epilepsy? What got you involved in this line of work?
Chance,
Okay.
I think. So I was an undergraduate psychology student just finishing, and one of the lecturers asked me if I wanted to go and work for her stroke service. It was an unpaid position, but that's quite common in the UK as your first step. And at the end of that, she said, I haven't got any money, but there's a psychologist next door called Gus Baker who seems to be quite good at getting money, and he works in epilepsy. Why don't you go and speak to him? I went across, spoke to Gus, left with a job, and that's where I am.
Okay, and this is one thing's led on to another. Tell me about your experience of epilepsy before you got involved in this. Had you ever witnessed a seizure or seen a seizure out in the real world?
So not out in the real world, but occasionally on the stroke ward, we would kind of have some of our patients experience seizures. But no, my kind of real kind of experience of epilepsy very much started when I set foot into the Walton Centre.
Okay, and can I ask, when you first saw a seizure, what was the impact on you? How did it make you feel?
I think because I'm a prepper, I'd watch lots of videos, use the charities' websites and things to kind of look at those. So I think I can still remember certainly my first generalized tonic-clonic seizure I witnessed in a child. I felt like maybe I paused for too long, but then because you've prepped, you know what you need to do, you know which buttons to press, you know who to call in. And so, yeah, actually I felt quite surprisingly calm.
And that was the preparation, and I can only imagine, and I think this really informs, I think when we counsel parents and partners, you realise how terrifying this must be to see this.
But if everyone knows what to do and has a job, actually that kind of terror gets a little bit less and everyone just goes into practical mode.
Okay. You mentioned mentors.
Yes.
Would you like to tell us a bit about your mentors and what they left you with, and the skills that they taught you, and what brought you further on in your career from there?
Yes, I'm very fortunate that I've worked with a number of kind of different people over the years in different specialties. It was a very kind of multidisciplinary kind of world that I work in, both at the Children's Hospital and in research. And, so I mentioned I started at Walton with Gus Baker, who very much showed me the importance of neuropsychologists leading, neuropsychologists collaborating. And then I had colleagues like Jill Clayton-Smith, and who's a geneticist in Manchester, very much around detail. She was all about the detail. She was all about the passion around kind of children. And then I think as I've kind of moved on, my mentors now are the peers that I work with. And, I'm inspired and I learn so much from my national and my international colleagues. And I think events like this are excellent for reconnecting with people and just getting those little bits of inspiration from each other, but also from talks and so on.
Okay. Would you like to explain, maybe, because your career's obviously brought you from stroke onto epilepsy and then onto these national and international podia looking at the effects of anti-seizure medicine. Would you like to talk about that just for a minute, with the kind of things that you're looking at?
It's my favourite topic, so yeah. So when I started at the Walton Centre, there was a project going on that was linked in with Kim Medda's US kind of project around anti-seizure medication exposure in pregnancy. And I remember being struck that, these were medicines that were kind of being widely used in our neurology clinics, but we were still asking the questions about whether there was any impact on fetal development and therefore later child health and neuropsychological functioning. And I think I just was quite shocked by that. And so that's then taken me on that kind of passion to kind of fix that problem. It's kind of taken me through my PhD onto research fellowships, now kind of leader of my own group. And also we've just started the first clinical service in the NHS for children exposed to medicine. So now we have a full MDT where we can kind of review children. Clinically, we can offer that kind of diagnostic process. Is it related to the medicine, or actually have they got another condition that's actually associated, or actually do we then have to go back if not and have that conversation about, well, yes, we think possibly the valproate is associated with the difficulties that you've had. It's been a very long journey. I'm constantly, even still, frustrated by the slowness of pharmacovigilance practice. And even within that, neurodevelopmental outcomes often forgotten. And you'll hear that a lot from neuropsychologists, whether it be pediatric epilepsy, metabolic conditions, and then exposure syndromes. And so I feel like we've had to fight for our corner a little bit. We've really had to show why this was important. And so my colleagues at the Pregnancy Register, you know John Craig very well, it took me a decade of lobbying him constantly to agree to then turn the Pregnancy Register into kind of something that had neurodevelopmental follow-up on a par with fetal congenital anomalies.
Often strikes me when I listen to you that we always have to persuade patients and families about the way forward, but sometimes we have to persuade colleagues about the way forward,
isn't it?
as well.
And new needs money, new needs a lot of thought and time, and actually, so it's no necessary criticism of everyone, but there's just all these systems around, aren't they, and all these pressures. I mean, in terms of convincing kind of people with epilepsy and families, we over-recruit to nearly all of our studies. This is something that families want. This is something that women with epilepsy really, they know they don't have the information that they need to make a decision around pregnancy. And so they're willing to participate in research.
Do you get the impression now that families and patients feel that the professions are listening to them?
Good question. In my clinical work, yes, I feel very much in pediatric epilepsy, most of my families would feel kind of listened to. I think when I go out to assess children in the context of research, I still feel maybe women who are reflecting on their progress through adult services in the UK maybe feel a little bit more like it's just a process, and they aren't necessarily always equal partners. And there's always some glimmer of amazing practice. So whenever I do any home visits in Liverpool, Janine Winterbottom, people always mention her name as someone who takes the time, goes above and beyond. So I think it varies, doesn't it? But actually, particularly in the UK, we're faced with very kind of tight resource setting at the moment, and that does impact on care.
What do you think of the importance of the patient organisations in directing policy around treatment of epilepsy and outcomes?
I think patient organisations that really have patients with lived experience of certain topics are absolutely important. I think those conversations can be really enhanced by having people there. In our own work, we've seen, kind of a lot of the movement that we've seen around kind of improved pregnancy pharmacovigilance, improved kind of government response to the kind of the situation where valproate went on being prescribed without warning for many, many years. That didn't come about because I was pushing. That came about because of families. Families were the one that went and trawled the British archives to find some documents about when these drugs were first kind of licensed. Families are the ones that meet on a regular basis with our kind of lawmakers down in the House of Parliament in the UK to push things forward. And so I think those with lived experience have an absolutely critical part to play in this. And actually, we learn a lot from them. So I've just co-produced some research directly with, right from start to finish, not just, we're going to do this project, what do you think? But also, you design it, you interpret the data, you be co-authors on a paper. And I learned a lot. And I probably now would never do a paper again without having somebody co-produce it, because they do offer that extra something that we don't see.
And in a sense, this has been the absolute proof of principle that families and patients can drive national policy. And I think in your field, that's been particularly true. Maybe not so much in other aspects of epilepsy, and maybe we can take that on board to incorporate patients and families and what they want to do. One of the things that always strikes me when I hear you speak is that actually your national and international influence comes alongside your clinical work. You could not do one without the other.
No.
And sometimes I worry that in other areas of epilepsy, you rise through the ranks and you move to be influential and you can leave the clinical work behind. But particularly in neuropsychology, that's not the case.
No, I mean, I often think about my life would be a lot easier if I just had one job to go to. I had one office, one car park. But no, I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way. I think, as you say, that bi-directional kind of information back and forth. I think particularly now my clinical work has moved to kind of the fetal exposure stuff. It mirrors exactly what I research. But you learn a lot, and the collaborations you have both as a clinician with other clinicians and a researcher with other researchers are so important, and I like that kind of bridge between the two. And so as tired as it makes me, I'm quite happy to have those two sides to my life.
Do you find that obviously the UK's very rich history of neuropsychology, psychiatry in and around epilepsy seems to be particularly strong? Has that been a help or a hindrance, do you think?
I don't know, because I think in paediatric neuropsychology and therefore paediatric epilepsy more widely, I don't really think we've necessarily always had such a kind of a strong mantle. And I think because I've always sat slightly differently, like not many neuropsychologists do fetal exposure, they're looking at epilepsy, brain injury, kind of pediatric stroke, etc. Maybe I've kind of just had to find kind of my way through this wilderness a little bit kind of more isolated possibly at times. There isn't a specialist interest group for fetal exposures and things like that, for example. There's going to be. I'm going to set one up next year. That's on my list. But I think it's maybe different for my career than maybe for others.
And in terms of both as a neuropsychologist and as a woman, do you feel listened to in the world of epilepsy? Do you think that's something that people will give you enough space to express yourself and make your presence felt?
I think so. I think initially when I first started in this, it's like, oh gosh, I'm a neuropsychologist, but then I was like, hang on, these outcomes that we're looking at are neuropsychological functioning outcomes. And then once I kind of had a word with myself and thought, no, I absolutely should be here. I absolutely should be the one designing this study, etc., because these are the outcomes that I do day to day. So I think actually it was maybe more about how I viewed it initially when I was more junior. And now I'm like, I'm here and I will be listened to. And you know me, if people don't listen, I just carry on until they do.
Well, that persistence is really important. And one of the things that's come out in some of the interviews has been this imposter syndrome. And I know that our junior trainees will look at us and think, well, everyone imagined you were anointed one day and given that position. Imposter syndrome, is that something you've encountered, the why me moment?
Oh yeah, and still, definitely. I've got a talk later and, I've been practicing in my room this morning. I'm still 19 years on in this and I'm still practicing my presentations because you want to do a good job in an area where it's so underserved. You feel like this responsibility, but then you panic thinking, oh my gosh, am I the right person to have this responsibility? And in one way, you sort of look for someone else to come along, but then you're like, oh, well, actually, but I've worked really hard on this. So I don't necessarily want other people to come along and do this for me. So it's kind of, a bit of a kind of mixed whirling set of emotions.
Do you like moving from the why me to the why not me?
Yes. But then you have to keep reminding yourself that's not like a light bulb moment where you're like, oh no, I'm here now, imposter syndrome's gone. I think it's something that you constantly deal with throughout your career. And maybe find just better ways to deal with it. Or just you're so busy that the anxiety just doesn't even register anymore. You run from one thing to the other. I think that also helps.
And tell me about outside epilepsy and neuropsychology. What takes you away from work?
Takes me away picking up my children from school.
Right, okay.
So life's very busy. I think I'm not the best at carving out time to do something myself. It's something that I annually say I'll work on, New Year's resolutions and all that, and I probably am not great. The only thing I do is run on a Sunday morning. That's the only kind of regular thing. But yeah, that's the age I'm at. That's kind of where we are. And I guess I have a lot of fun with my colleagues. I have a lot of fun with friends outside work. And, my kids are quite good fun too. And doing paediatric neuropsychology is also really helpful, actually, because my children constantly are the test cases for new trainees. So my children have been assessed with the WISC and measures like that repeatedly throughout their lives. Okay. It's very useful. It's a good resource.
Do you have any regrets in your career? Any projects that you've not followed up on that you wish you had or that allowed to pass you by?
I think there's always lots of little things, isn't there? I wish I'd managed to include that cohort in that study, or I wish I'd asked that question in that data collection a little bit differently, because now I'm at the analysis phase and I've really kind of done myself a wrong here. I think in terms of big things, though, it's hard to regret because you made the decision at that time with the information you have. Hindsight's a great thing. So maybe some things I'd go back and do differently now, but I wouldn't say I regret because, I made that decision at the time, thinking the way that I did then and with the situation around me as it was. So, nothing massive.
One of the things that's part of your profile now is very much media presence, responding to the media, going to national and international committees. Is that something that you had to particularly prepare for or train in? Or is it something you've learned as you've gone along?
A little bit of both. So the media stuff kind of has been... It's still not something I don't like doing. I feel it's a role to try and keep things sensible. So in the UK, for example, lots of our newspapers, as you know, write about kind of fetal exposure to anti-seizure medications, particularly valproate. And I feel like my role is to, when they reach out to me, is not just provide a quote, but actually ask, can I see the story? Can I help? And sort of mold that and try and make sure, to try and remove the sensationalism, I guess. And does it always work out? Not always, but at least I've tried to kind of keep that evidence-based and sensational. The university, I'm very fortunate, gives media training. We have a kind of a media office that helps, but I think it's just something that you sort of just have to learn with time, and also not feel pressured to say, we don't know the answer to this, or I'm not happy to say that. I don't think you should put that in your article, and here's the reasons why. My challenge at the moment is it's very time consuming. Again, it's another kind of layer of unpaid activity that clinicians and academics have to do. And I struggle with that sometimes, but I think it's important because, again, the media reaches out to our patients possibly in some ways more than we do occasionally. And so I feel it is an important role for us to try to make sure that how our science is reported is as positive and as accurate as it can be, and as helpful for people with epilepsy.
I sometimes think that work with the media, it's easy to lose the humility. And one of the things that always comes across with you is a sort of confident humility. It's not about me. This is about getting the story right.
Yeah.
And I think clinicians sometimes get into a bit of trouble when they want to be the story or a big part of the story. And you need that humility and groundedness, I think.
Oh, every media opportunity that comes to me, I initially try and pass it to somebody else. And again, and often that is the patient groups. Have you got somebody with lived experience talking about this? Go there first. And then secondly, it's like, right, are any of my colleagues going to be able to do this? Okay.
One of the things about the neurodevelopmental work is that the animal signals give us a small insight into the effect of these drugs. But the rest of it, the clinical application, is largely spectatorial, really. That must be quite frustrating, having to twiddle our thumbs and wait for this information to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been described quite frequently as impatient, and I accept I am with this regard, because you're right. We see signals coming through, and then sometimes we get children coming through our clinical service as well. So we begin to get concerned about medications before there's an evidence base, and that's one of the big pieces of work that I'm involved in at the moment. Is it was European funded, a European-wide study about how we can improve medicine pharmacovigilance so we can reduce those timelines, because we wait decades to find out, and the number of children that are then exposed is a problem there. But then secondly, the number of women that are denied a treatment that might be really good for them just because we don't have the pregnancy safety data on that medication yet. So it kind of works both ways. We're just not optimizing care for mums or for the potential offspring. And by improving pharmacovigilance strategy, reducing those timelines, I think we can do better by everybody.
I do get a sense, though, that the professions, plural, have learnt from the Valput story, and that actually that mistake will not be made again. Now, I agree with you. We can't be too cautious, or else we deprive people of important treatments. But the learning around the world of epilepsy, it seems to me to be there. This will not take decades anymore.
I disagree.
Oh, right.
Yeah, completely. It's happened again. We had Topiramate go on a pregnancy prevention plan just at the autumn last year. That was licensed in mid-90s. So we have waited decades. Have we seen since Valproate, since Topiramate, a massive influx of work around pregnancy pharmacovigilance? No. Our UK kind of regulator doesn't have a remit to fund. So we don't have any continuous funding. So we're left playing the grant game. We're left liaising with pharmaceutical partners to get small pots of money that then run out. Nothing. The infrastructure has not changed. So we are in the same position. We don't know about so many of those medications, lacosamide, brivaracetam, cenobamate. We don't know about these medicines, and we don't have any significant proactive strategies ongoing at the moment. And that's where I'm trying to change.
Okay, so I'll accept that we don't have the governmental infrastructure, but we've got a profession that is clamouring for this information. Every time a new drug comes on, or any time another year passes with the third generation from the early thousands, people are looking for this information, and we're having to just sit and twiddle our thumbs and wait for accidental exposure.
So neurology now wants this information. Absolutely. The infrastructure to deliver that in a better way just isn't there. And I think we will continue to make that kind of same mistake until actually we do a lot better. I mean, I think as well, we look at congenital malformations, and your app had an amazing impact and continues to there. We have that, but it's still, not every kind of pregnancy gets referred to your app. We have the onset of the secondary use of population data. Again, brilliant. That's taking us further forward. But actually what we don't have is all of these systems kind of regularly funded so that they can run continuously. We don't have pregnancy registers, apart from the UK one now, extending to do neurodevelopmental follow-up routinely. So those outcomes that aren't about major congenital anomalies still aren't well served. And actually, you look at the pregnancy prevention plans for valproate and topiramate, they were tipped by the neurodevelopmental data. And so we have to think about the outcomes, we have to think about our strategy, we have to do more, and we need more people. There's a very friendly group of researchers that do pregnancy pharmacovigilance work for the anesthesia medications, and that's nice, but we need more.
And in terms of the next 10, 20 years, what you're saying here is we need better infrastructure, better legalised strictures around which we must practice to make sure this information's definitely coming our way and not sitting in backwaters.
Yeah, exactly. The data is being collected, and that there needs to be kind of that prospective, proactive initiation of getting women through. So, for example, we just women want it. So we just redid our pregnancy register, as you know, to focus on neurodevelopmental outcomes as well as malformations. We over-recruited. We recruited that fast. We had to pause recruitment while we extended our ethics. So families want this, clinicians want this. The challenge then, though, when you're building a prospective infrastructure is it needs core funding, and that's what we don't get from regulators and from government. So then you're on small, short-term research funding, which expires. So then you close your recruitment, your staff leave, you then kind of are in that lottery of grants. That isn't conducive to a well-functioning pharmacovigilance system.
And there's probably only one group that can persuade the government to change that, and that'll be our patient organisations, won't it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Just to finish up then, obviously with your work in committees and in commissions and driving policy forward, what advice would you give our junior researchers about getting involved in this? Is this hanging back and waiting to be invited, or being a wee bit more proactive in taking part in some of these organisations?
No, I think generally anything that interests you, get involved. Don't wait to be asked. Kind of link into people that do it, ask them questions, tell them that you're passionate, tell them that you want to get involved. And don't stop. If you don't get invited to one thing, ask about another thing, start to do some research yourself, prove kind of your interest, and then people will kind of almost have to kind of bring you in, even if they didn't maybe initially think that they needed to.
Brilliant. Rebecca, that's hugely, as I knew it would be, hugely encouraging and inspirational. So hopefully our junior researchers can take some from this. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
I look forward to meeting up with you again. Thank you.
Thanks, John Paul. Thank you.